Hi everyone, today we're going to be replacing the front brake pads and discs on this 2012 registered Kia Ceed. Looking on YouTube, there isn't many videos explaining how to do this for a particular model, so I thought I'd make my own video to help any of you that may want to have a go at renewing yours and to save yourselves a bit of money into the bargain. So let's get started. So first things first, before we get the car up on the jacks and put it onto axle stands, first thing you must do is loosen off each of these wheel nuts. It's easier when the car is on the ground because it uses the weight of the car to make it easier to loosen them. So the socket you're going to need is a 21mm socket. Pop it onto the wheel nut, and it's always best to have a really long bar to be able to put some purchase on it, because there's a lot of torque behind these wheel nuts. I've also used a reducer, which you can get from Halfords or any other motor factor, just to reduce to accommodate the size of the socket. Pop it onto the socket, and then obviously anti-clockwise. There we go, as easy as that. Do the same with the next one. Remember to face opposite wheel nuts. That one. That one. And that one. Nice and easy. And I get the locking wheel nut for the final one. So we've got our locking wheel nut. As you can see, it's a special design, designed up just to fit this particular wheel nut. And you just make sure it goes in place nice and snug. Put your existing wrench over it, and then with a bit of leverage we undo that one as well. There, nice and easy. Now we need our tire jack. This is a 2.5 ton capable one. We don't need one of those. You can use scissor jacks or the smaller variety of these. It's just one that I use from time to time. Locate the jacking points under the car. On the Kia Ceed, it's denoted by the double edge, double skin on the metal. Just quickly show you. So that's between here and here, and that's where we'll jack the car. Put the jack underneath, get it positioned. Sometimes you can use lifting blocks, you don't always need to. And then just lift the car. This is on the strongest point. Right, we've supported the car on axle stands under the subframe just here. That'll hold it secure. Always best to use axle stands in conjunction with a trolley jack, just in case the trolley jack fails. Now we can take the wheel off. And just under each bolt. Okay, so a quick tip to enable you to undo the caliper bolts. You turn the wheel so it's facing, the wheel's facing out. This allows access to get your extendable bar in, and with a little bit of push you can then loosen the caliper bolts. Front caliper bolts are 14mm, this one here and that one there. Always pays to put a bit of WD-40 on there first, or the like, just to ease it, let it settle in, and then you can use the method obviously I showed earlier. So we put our 14mm socket on, and you can loosen up each caliper bolt.
like so. Once these are undone, you'll be able to take the caliper off. So we're now removing the big bolts at the rear of the caliper. Can generally be quite rusty. It's been on there quite some time. That's the top, and there's the bottom. So now, with a bit of luck, we should be able to move the caliper, like so. Just be careful as you're removing it, because you don't want to tear any brake lines, and we'll need to support that section in a moment once we've got the caliper off. There we go, just keep pulling at it and eventually it comes off. So there's your piston. That will need rewinding back later on, and obviously make sure you're holding and supporting this part of the caliper, because you don't want to, like I say, stretch or tear the brake line. What I tend to do for the time being, rest it up here and I'll support it by tying it to the suspension spring with cable ties. Right, so this is how I tie up the brake caliper. Got a nice little hole there, put a cable tie through there, up onto the suspension spring, and clip them together. Make sure it's nice and firm. And that will support it and hold it in place while we take the rest of the brake caliper off and the brake disc. Okay, so now we need to take the remainder of the caliper off, which is this piece. That should just slide forward like that, and you can see you've got a bit of the plate left from the old brake pads, and I generally clean these up before I put them back on. As you can see, there's the old brake pads, quite heavily scored there, and that one's not got a lot left on it, so yeah, definitely need replacing. Okay, so now we're going to get the brake disc itself off, and that's held on with these two retaining screws, one here and one here. So just put in a Phillips head screwdriver. Might need a little bit of a push to get it going. Sometimes they're quite stiff. That was fine. There we go. So we'll just remove these. That's one. And the other. And the whole disc now should come free. You might need a bit of a clout to get it out, but there we go. And that's one old disc removed. Okay, so these are the new brake discs that we've purchased to replace the old ones with. These are Mintex. You can get other brands. This particular model is MDC 2392C. And these are the ones that have been, or have been reliably informed that these fit this particular Kia. Always best to check before you make that purchase though. So what's always best to do before you put the new discs on, just clean up the surfaces of where the nuts go, and put some fresh copper paste on afterwards. And this just loosens any rust that's stuck to it. This isn't in too bad condition actually. Once that's all cleaned up, I always put a little bit of copper paste onto the facings of the hub. That way it will stop corrosion and stop it from sticking if it needs to come off in future. So I apply it to the hub. I also apply it to the back of the new brake disc. Okay, so now we're going to put the new brake disc on. Make sure that you line up the screw holes here and here with the screw holes in the hub. So that's for when we reapply it. So Get it that way round. Put it on through the bolts. Make sure it's seated nice and firmly, and then we can put the screws in. So now just put the screws, or the retaining screws, back in. That's the top one, and then the bottom one. Keep it hand tight, you don't need it massively tight, just hand tight is fine. It'll be held in by the caliper once it's on. There we go. Okay, so now we've got this part of the caliper. We're going to take out the old brake pads themselves, so they just push through on these metal sliders. This one will push this way. Just give it a wriggle and off they come. Okay. Okay, so now we're just cleaning up the caliper, ready for when we put the new brake pads in. Just literally clean up these metal pieces here that help it slide on that side and there. Just give it a general clean as well. Clean the facings there. And one thing to remember to do is to push the slider pins back in, because obviously you're going to have a lot more thickness on the pads, so these need to be pushed back in. Don't have to push them massively all the way in, but just so that they're ready for when we put the new brake pads on. So here we've got the new brake pads ready to go on. Again, I've used Mintex this time around, and these are model MDB 3363. Again, you can use other brands. So let's just open them up. And there we go. Come with the lubricant, metal plates, and the new pads themselves. So when assembling these brake pads, just remember to put the backing plates on. And these slot on quite simply. Just clip over the edge of the brake pads themselves, and these two holes seat firmly. Always best to put some lubricant on there to stop them squeaking and squealing as well. Okay, so we're just putting the lubricant on the sliding edges. There we go. Just make sure it doesn't go anywhere near the brake disc itself. Okay, so we've got the new brake pads on, all lubricated. You just need to offer it back up to the bracket, like so. Just make sure it fits on. It might be a bit tighter, obviously. There we go. Now we can put the bolts back in. So now we're going to put the bolts back in once we've got the caliper in place. Just clean up the bolts, clean the threads. That one. Just get any gunk out of the threads, and then put some of our copper grease just on the thread, just to help it go back in. And put the bracket on. Line it up. It's that one. And the other one. Okay, so before we push the brake pistons back, we've now got to undo the brake fluid reservoir cap, because this will push the brake fluid back up as we push the piston back. So with the caliper back on, we haven't tightened up the small screws yet, or the big screws. but what we'll do is we'll put the piston part of the caliper back on now. So we have to cut our pipe. Make sure you hold the piston when you cut it, so you don't stretch the brake fluid cable. So cut there. Like so. And then we can put this part of the caliper back on. Now we're going to have to, as you can see, there's not enough clearance for the piston, so we're going to need to wind the piston back. So let me just support that there while I get something to wind the piston back with. Okay, so what we have to do now is push this piston, which has come out back into its housing to accommodate the width of the new discs and pads. So to do so, if you've got one of these brake rewind tools, these are really great. Just make short work of it. So you place the plate on the brake caliper there. This little indented edge fits in there. What I've used on the other side is just one of the old brake pads. And the idea is, as you turn this piece here, it'll lock in and then start to push back the brake caliper. Like so. You can see it's pushing the caliper back. Give a few turns until you've got enough clearance to allow it to fit over the new brake pads. And what this is also doing, will be pushing the fluid back up through the brake line, and hence why we had to remove the brake fluid cap. Also, you need to keep an eye on the brake fluid, because this will be filling up as you push. There we go, and we've got our piston pretty much fully seated back. So we can now undo the rewind tool, take it off, and you can see the piston's pushed almost fully back. This should now give us enough clearance for it to fit quite nicely, yeah, over the new brake pads. So we've got the caliper seated there nicely, and there's enough room for it to jiggle about a bit on the mount. We've now got to put the retaining pins back for the caliper sliders. So again, a little bit of copper grease, and we just put it in, one in there to hold it in place, and then another one. Put that one on there, and then we're ready to tighten everything back up and put the wheel back on. Okay, so now everything's tightened back up. We've just turned the wheel so that we can get the tyre back on, and just line it up and then pop the wheel back on. Like so. Hold it in place, and we'll put the nuts back on. Don't tighten the wheels fully up straight away. Just get them hand tight. Looking at opposite ends. Okay, so we're just doing the last of the nuts. Obviously, you can't get it too tight because the wheel will still spin. Grip it in an opposite pattern. They're pretty much hand tight, which will mean that it's square on the wheel and on the hub, and we can now take the axle stand out and then release our jack, and that's one side done. Okay, so final thing to do, once you've done the same with the other side and everything's tightened up and the car's lowered, You're going to need to pump the brakes, and obviously that will make the fluid go back down, but just put the cap back on once that's all done. Don't want to go losing the cap. And you can close the bonnet and take it for a test drive. The brakes need to be bedded in, so don't go tearing around straight away. Just do light stopping movements every so often to gradually scrub in the brake pads.